Hey Shaylin, how's it going?
Hi, Mitzi. Good. How are you?
Pretty good. It's been a hot day today. Hot day today.
Uh, I could use some hot weather. It snowed here yesterday.
Oh, yeah, we had our annual Special Olympics track and field event,
Hmm.
and we're hitting the eight, so it was rather hot.
Oh my gosh. It's gonna be 80 here next week in Denver. I'm so excited.
Hi, all. Just bear with us. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're getting on the top of it here.
Hi, Talani.
I'm here, everybody.
Okay, I think I gave you access to share your screen. Let me know if that doesn't work.
Cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Okay, let me figure this out.
Do we have very many people on?
Okay, I think I should do it now.
Okay, let's see. Okay, there I am. And now let's see if I can go to share screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
I don't know why it does this. Mitzi, can you, do you know how to do this?
Share screen disabled.
Yeah, I'm taking a look, but I'm on an iPad, so I have limitations. So hold up.
Okay, see if that works now, Talani.
Okay. I'll go back to my more share screen. There we go.
Okay,
We're cooking with
sorry,
gas.
everybody.
That's okay. Excuse me. Are we ready to rock and roll?
Yes.
Well, Mitzi, I don't know if you want to say a couple of comments to get us started since you're an invasive species coordinator.
Sure, I can.
Okay.
Good afternoon, all. So as you may know, we've introduced a new invasive species program, and with that, we're trying to provide different opportunities to get some information out there. And as you know, invasive species comes into the One Health world, obviously, with the introduction of new species and areas. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Talani Francisco, who's going to provide us with some insight on invasive species diseases and health concerns. Take it away, Talani.
All righty, thank Mitzi, and welcome everybody. I'm sorry we're a little bit late. I had the wrong link, and that's the world of virtual meetings nowadays. So those of you that are joining us from the Southeast probably know what this is, and I thank Mitzi Reed for getting us this picture. These are some folks down in the Mississippi Choctaw area, down around Pearl River. And can anybody put in the chat what they think these folks are removing? We know it's an invasive species. We know that, right? So anybody want to take a guess at what are they doing down there? Are they harvesting grits? Anybody know what grits are? No. Okay. So I'm not seeing anything coming up in the kudzu. Yes, and herring. That actually is exactly what they're doing. So they're removing some kudzu vine. And when I lived down in Mississippi, we did not know what kudzu was, but boy, that stuff just takes over. In big invasive species, it's not toxic to plants, I mean to animals, but it is very toxic to other plants because it chokes out the native flora and fauna. And so kudzu vines, yeah, really, really bad. And some wonderful government person thought it would be great to introduce these things. So what are we going to do? We are going to talk about what exactly is an invasive species and why are we even concerned about them? And then maybe some ideas of what can we do? Because sometimes we just kind of feel like our hands are tied. There's not a whole heck of a lot we can do. Now, I picked two of probably the most famous species, invasive species that we all think about in the animal world and in the plant world. Our friends, the feral pigs, and everybody, I think just about everybody has a love, if you will, for these feral pigs and how they got started. You know what, settlers, people releasing pigs, and then all of a sudden they just took off. Because you know that in a sounder we can have a boar and a mama pig, and she'll have up to probably 8 to 10 piglets every 90 to 110 days. So we're having multiple regenerations. So from one sow, we can probably get, over the course of a year, we could get 50 to 60 piglets. That is incredible reproductive fecundity. So yeah, don't really care too much for the feral pigs. And we'll talk about feral pigs here in a minute. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, we're going back to Mississippi and we're looking at just some of the kudzu, what it does, it chokes out trees, and it just really, it's a tough vine. When we start talking about, animals and their habitats, kudzu's just taken over. So you can see how it has taken over this tree. What are we doing about all the nesting animals that are in there, the little rodents that are trying to live in there? And that kudzu can just really choke them out. So two big species that we probably deal with an awful lot in various parts of the US. Now, I'm going to start my presentation today with a kind of an invasive species a lot of people don't think about, but it's something I do on a day-to-day basis. Equine. Yeah, people are like, oh, the horses. Don't you love horses? I'm like, I love horses. I have 4 standing in my backyard. Where I don't love horses is where they're not supposed to be. And that's out on our landscapes. And we know that even in the Southeast, we've got feral horse issues on tribal lands because it's expensive to own a horse. And what a lot of people do is they realize that, oh my gosh, I love this horse. I watched Black Beauty. I want to get a horse. They get the horse and they realize that hay is $22 a bale. And that's for grass hay. That's a decent grass hay. Some of your orchards and timothies are now, the droughts and stuff like that, they're getting upwards of $25-30 for a 2-strand bale. And so people realize, oh, they eat a lot. Guess what? If an animal eats a lot, what does it do? It poops a lot, right? So people get these animals and they realize I got a 1,000-pound critter. It's eating a bale of hay every 2 to 3 days. It's pooping out just as much. And I still have to water it. And now my little kid that I bought it for doesn't want anything because they're more interested in their cell phone than they are in the horse. So now mom and dad are like, what do we do with this thing? Oh, we got a great idea. Let's take it out to the Indian land because Indians love horses and release the animal. Yep. If they release a mare, we talk about the reproductive fecundancy of pigs. Horses reproduce we say that their population doubles about every 4 to 5 years. So if we started out with 1 mare, in 4 to 5 years, we could have as many as 5 mares. Okay. That's incredible. Got to have a stallion, right? Got to have some stallions. But what happens when we start seeing burros and horses together? Then we get our little friends, the mules, right? So, and out here in the Western United States, we have plenty of burros. And you get the burros released. Now you got mules. Typically your mules are, not reproductively fertile, but we've also seen where people are intentionally crossbreeding horses with wild asses, with zebras and zonkies. Now we've got zebra donkey crosses and they're running all over the place. No, not really, but they're in certain places where people are trying to do this. And people realize that they can't necessarily take control of these critters. Now they've got them out and they're letting them go on the landscapes. And they don't realize on our tribal lands, we really don't want them or need them either because we have plenty of our own. Well, we get into the One Health concern. What are some of the One Health concerns aside from vehicular accidents and just the pure nature that these critters eat a lot? And they can come in. We've got some of our pueblos here in New Mexico where overabundant horses are coming in and they're just degrading people's gardenscapes, their yards and stuff, and they're leaving their poop around, which gets into some of our diseases of concern. Where you have poop laying around and where you've got a lot of it, you're gonna have bacterial problems, right? So the Campylobacter and the Crypto and the Salmonella, all of those GI diseases that come with poop. And so we can have some of that if they're pooping in water supplies where people, might be going to get some water. That is a big concern. You notice that I have it at the top, rabies, because rabies it's something that all mammalian species have to be concerned about. When I look at my PubMed, listings that I've got, rabies is constantly on a daily basis. There was just this morning a cat down in Southeast Texas that tested positive. Now it bit its owner, and it probably got it from skunks or from raccoons. So don't have pet skunks, don't have pet raccoons. But rabies, big problem. With the exception of 2 people in all of human history, 2 people have survived rabies infections. So we want to definitely make sure that we don't have rabies running around. It's a standard protocol now with the Association of Equine Practitioners that all horses, it's part of their core vaccine scheme that they get is to have rabies vaccine. And I do that with all the horses that I vaccinate. So always got to be concerned about rabies. People will say, well, how do you know if a horse has rabies? Beware of the choking horse. And they can look like a horse that just has colic. And they're spreading it through the saliva. The saliva, you know, is real close to the brain. And this is a disease of the central nervous system. So always got to be concerned about rabies. And if you see skunks around in the middle of the day, if you've got raccoons around in the middle of the day, beware, you might be having some rabies problems, because those animals shouldn't be out in the middle of the day, and they will go and they'll bite them. You know, they'll attack in their furious stage of rabies. So got to be concerned about rabies. West Nile virus. This one back in 1999, see, I'm showing my age again, came in with rampant, just, it was like a wildfire, hit a bunch of songbirds in New York City. The birds were dying off. People were wondering what's happening. Is it, you know, Armageddon? And lo and behold, it was West Nile virus. And within the course of about 3 to 4 years, West Nile had just come across, and now it's endemic in the United States. So we just know that West Nile is here. It's carried by mosquitoes. So another reason to always wear your mosquito protection. And it's another one that it's a zoonotic disease. It can get humans very, very ill. I had a really good friend who his mother caught West Nile virus. She ended up losing her eyesight and most of her hearing because the virus attacked those nerves and that part of her brain. So West Nile virus, very, very bad. You know, we're just coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, or SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. And West Nile virus is another bad one. It came in fast and furious, but we got to be aware, and, you know, we got to know that it's spread through mosquitoes, but horses are a dead end reservoir. So what you can do is you can kind of use horses as a sentinel. So now that's what we're kind of doing, is we're taking samples from horses, and if horses have it, have antibodies for it, then we know, okay, we've got it in the area. Here in the desert Southwest, it's kind of one of those things that we just know every horse is, again, we're going to vaccinate for West Nile. The encephalitides, Eastern, Western, Venezuelan. Venezuelan is considered a foreign animal disease, so we don't currently have it in the United States. We don't want it here. And it's very difficult to get vaccines for Venezuelan equine encephalitis. But once again, Eastern equine encephalitis and Western equine encephalitis, more times than not, it's Eastern that we're seeing in the medical journals, that horses have popped positive, a human has it, and it causes pretty severe encephalitis in humans. Some people with already compromised immune systems will succumb, and so there have been deaths associated with Eastern equine encephalitis. Glanders is a foreign animal disease to the United States, but any horses that are coming up from the southern border that go through border entry or come in, you know, for polo or dressage or whatever reason they're being race horses, all of that, they all have to be tested for glanders because, again, it's transmissible to humans. So the people that are around those, and again, biting flies, mosquitoes, any of those hemophagous insects that would feed on a horse, then feed on a human, can present that. Campylobacter, crypto, and salmonella, all associated with poop. So we want to make sure that when we have a lot of horses, that we're trying to get that poop to desiccate or to remove it, better yet, and to get it into composting somewhere where those bacteria, those organisms, those microspores can all be degraded by the heat and everything, and then they don't present a public health concern. And then we've kind of talked a little bit about mosquitoes, but of course, fleas and ticks. Fleas and ticks love everybody. And we're going to talk a little bit about fleas and ticks because they're just gross. You know, I'll just be the first one to admit, fleas and ticks are just disgusting. They're not my favorite things to deal with. But we have to know that horses are considered by the Bureau of Indian Affairs an invasive species. So we're talking tribal lands, okay? We're not talking federally protected wild horses and burros, but on tribal lands, horses are considered an invasive species by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they're giving out quite a few dollars to address those feral horses that are on tribal lands and really degrading those landscapes. Now we go to our pigs that we showed the first picture where we had that little micro sounder. And now we've got some just, why are pigs? You know, didn't everybody watch Charlotte Webb and think, oh gosh, you know, I love a pig, I want a pig. And for a while in the 80s and 90s, pot-bellied pigs, Vietnamese pot-bellied pigs were all the rage. Everybody was getting a pot-bellied pig because they all thought, you know, they start out as little 5 and 6 pound cute little piglets, and they're just adorable, and they run around and they're just cute as can be. And then people realized, oh, it's still a pig, and they grow up and they can be 200-300 pounds. And pigs are quite aggressive, and pigs are just not, there's a reason they, you know, when you're not tidy and stuff, people call you a pig. That's because pigs are just that way. Pigs are very smart though. So what we really are concerned about right now is Brucella suis and Brucella melitensis, but most of the time Brucella suis. Why? It cross reacts and it can give you big problems. In humans, Brucella infections are known as undulant fever, and that's really not something you want to get. It causes this generalized arthralgia, swollen lymph nodes. It comes back and forth in what we call this waxing and waning, which is called undulant fever, because you might have a fever of 103, then you'll be okay, you'll feel better. What does that also sound like? Sounds like COVID, doesn't it? But there again, this feral pigs can bring this in. They're having their sounders are everywhere. They're reproducing. It's the abortifacient material or that reproductive, you know, material, the afterbirth and all of the fluid that comes out, and it just infects the whole area wherever the sow has her, you know, where she's ever farrowed her piglets. Of course, once again, we talk about Salmonella and Campylobacter, and that's largely because, you know, pigs are pooping everywhere. Like you see in this picture, this guy's down in some water and they don't care. They're not going to a public bathroom and they're not cleaning themselves. They're just pooping. And now all that water is infected. And then somebody's going to go put it out on their fields possibly, or they might, you know, pump it out and use irrigation. Heaven forbid that somebody would actually take some of this and try to purify it, maybe not quite get it purified the way it needed to be and drink it, or kids would get into it and play, okay? So lots of public health reasons why feral pigs are just not a good idea to have them around, other than they're just really destructive. Now, there has been some recent literature talking about highly pathogenic avian influenza and SARS-CoV-2. Can it be found in feral pigs? It's kind of a question. We know that most people are hypothesizing right now that if you have dead birds that have, you know, died from HPAI, that they probably are what's causing so many of our other mammalian species, the mountain lions, the bobcats, the, you know, the mink and everybody else that's coming down these oddball, the bears, you know, in Montana. Why all these other, well, they're really kind of one of the theories is that they're probably eating those animals that were infected, and they themselves are, you know, they're hungry, they're coming out of hibernation, or they're in the middle of winter, and so their bodies are just not as strong, their immune systems aren't quite where they need to be, and so they're succumbing to the illness. So there is some speculation right now about whether it is a zoonotic disease. And Anne Herring has asked if pseudorabies has been seen in feral hogs. That was why in the late 1990s, the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service had a huge eradication program to eradicate pseudorabies virus, because we do know that it is in domestic swine. So yes, it has probably been out there and we just don't know it. But yeah, we need to be worried about pseudorabies or Ajusky's disease in feral swine, not a zoonotic disease to people. Okay, so that's why it's not on here. But yeah, pseudorabies, probably a big concern, more so because it could then get into our domestic swine populations. You see this picture on the bottom, what a beautiful cornfield I think that was. And that producer, that individual who planted that, and I took this off of the APHIS Animal and Plant Health website for Wildlife Services, but just look at the damage that these pigs came in. And this is probably not even a full night damage. They are incredibly damaging to crops and areas. They're going after the fresh corn. They're hungry. That's what they're going to do. Okay. They root up, they will dig and really burrow in, getting root systems and things like that. And in this case, they're just whacking off. It looks like aliens came in and just cleared out that poor cornfield. They're also pretty mean. If you've ever come across a pig boar with their tusks, I mean, those, they can be 6-8 inches long, and they're sharp because they're always kind of rooting and sharpening those tusks or those husks. And they, a pig's going to eat anything. That's why I've got down that they're omnivores. There was an article when I was doing all this research, I think it was last year or a year before, a lady in Texas, I don't mean to gross you guys out, but this is how bad feral pigs can be. She was a traveling nurse, and she would go to people's homes that, elderly, that were kind of shut in, check on them every day, help bathe them, whatever. So these people are in East Texas, and they were expecting her to come that morning. She never showed up. So the husband, who was in his 80s, went out on the front porch, and he looked and he said, but I see her car. I see her car parked, right in our driveway. And they're living out in the country. So they called the police and they said, would you please come and check, because we see her car, but we don't see her. Well, the police showed up and they found her body walking from her car, trying to get to the front porch of these people's home. Feral pigs got her and they killed her. That is the gospel truth. I tell you not. I can share that story. It made the news. I was just like, oh my gosh. So we got to be careful about feral pigs, because they can be very aggressive, and they have been known to kill people. More so than just their diseases that they're carrying, they can actually kill people. Another one, we don't always think about invasive species, because I'm guessing just about everybody's got a couple of these guys running around their house. I know I have 4. They're not barking right now. 4 dogs, 4 cats, but I keep them, in the house. I keep them on leash, whatever. But when we start talking tribal lands, when I go home out to Laguna, or when I'm out, hunting or working with our cattle out on our landscape, we have actually been chased by feral dogs and cats. We know that since 2000, there have been approximately 35 human deaths on tribal lands from feral dogs attacking people. So feral dogs are a huge concern. They're very aggressive. Again, we look at what are the total health ramifications. Diseases, got to always think about rabies. That's always got to be your number one. These aren't dogs and cats that are being vaccinated by your Indian Health Service folks, or they're not going to veterinarians. They're moms and dads, because they don't have moms and dads. Okay. They're feral animals. So who knows what they've got. Influenza, big one. We know that canine influenza is pretty rampant. It's going through a lot of our confinement areas, so a lot of shelters and dog pounds and things like that. Is that even a word we use anymore? Dog pound? See, I keep showing my age, but we can see influenza. So canine influenza virus, again, SARS-CoV-2. We know that in a lot of homes where folks have active infection, what are we doing when we don't feel good and we've got a little lap dog, or in my case, a 92-pound lap dog? I'm not feeling good. My husband's outside working, or he's not here. I'm going to snuggle up to my dog and I'm going to be like, oh, make me feel better. Make me feel better. I'm coughing on him, sneezing on him. Guess what? I've just infected the dog. The dog gets it, then the dog can give it back to humans. So it's this never ending cycle. So we have to advise people that when you're not feeling good, You need to stay away from your animals and not, definitely don't share, food with them. Don't give them your leftovers, because you can give them the COVID and then they can give it back to you. So sanitation, so important with that. And then, of course, we get into the fleas and ticks again. And I see fleas and ticks all the time. They're just gross, disgusting critters. But there's nothing like a big old engorged female tick. And I'll get a dog. A couple of weeks ago, I had one that I think we stopped at about 500 ticks. My technician and I just said, we're just dipping the dog and we're just going to start combing it and dropping them off in the bathtub, because we couldn't even pick them at that point. There were just so many. And then, of course, the dog has anemia and everything else. But a lot of these tick diseases are zoonotic. So Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, there's a whole plethora of them that we can get. And when our dogs are covered in ticks and they come into the house, that tick jumps off of the dog and they're going to get another blood meal. They're going to go to a human, right? Those big engorged females, they jump off of the dog, they lay their eggs hatch, and guess what? The eggs are looking for a blood meal. And so they don't care whether it's a dog, cat, human, they're going to go. They're going for them. This is my own little guy. He's now 92 pounds, but this is when I got him. This is about 2 months into when I got him. Attacked by 2 pit bulls, ripped his ears off. You can sort of see where I did the best I could to sew the ears back on. That left ear was just mangled. It was horrible, but I got it reattached to his cranium. He ended up losing all of the tissue around his neck. And that one was really tough. I was supposed to foster him just to get him better and get him back to his family. That was 6 years ago. They've never come back for him. So I think I'm probably keeping that dog. But that's Chubbos. And just, like I said, the aggressiveness that these feral dogs and cats, anybody ever try to pick up a feral cat? Yeah, you're probably, well, you can't see my neck because it's gotten better now, but I got whacked by some cats the other day. I was taking them out of a cage and the cat just went crazy. And this was a domestic cat. So feral cats, yeah, they're not cute, cuddly little kitties that you can just go up to. So gotta be careful about them. Cats, cat bite fever and cat scratches, really, really bad. Partially because where's kitty cat pooping? What do? They cover up their poop. So a lot of fecal bacteria in those nails. So just got to be careful with feral dogs and cats. I didn't want to leave out, because we are the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some fish. And I have a really good friend who's a fish biologist. And I asked her, I said, what do you think are the worst ones? She said, well, definitely Asian carp. That's, she said, they're horrible. They're very, very aggressive. And, we see them all jumping here in this picture that I got off the internet. But she said, Asian carp, all different forms of them. She said, they just outcompete the native fish. And so where we have tribes that are harvesting, salmon especially was what I was thinking of. We don't need Asian carp introduced into those waters. And if you've got them, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. But they definitely, they outcompete. They can bring in some diseases too, some herpes viruses and whirling disease and all the others. So we got to be careful about these introductions and how people, flush. The whole story about people flushing little fish that their kids no longer want, flushing them down the toilet, and they somehow or another get into the streams, or they dump them out in streams because people think that's more humane. I'm going to put the fish out there and let it live in nature. Not a good idea, right? So got to be aware, we want to get rid of those Asian carp, the big head, the black, the grass, and the silver carp. They're just not good for our native waters and our native fish. This really surprised me because I'm a trout fisherwoman. I'm an angler. I like to fly fish. And I love going after cutthroats and rainbow trouts. And she said, yeah, but they don't necessarily, they weren't native. And so they're not necessarily good for our native fisheries. And I just thought, snakeheads, yes. And there were a whole bunch. And I said, you know what? I'm not a fish expert, but there's a ton of fish out there. Any of our invasive fish, not good for our native fish. I apologize because when I put this up, the lionfish kind of covered over. But for our tribes that are more on the coastal areas and they're fishing, you know, whether they're up in Alaska or the Pacific or the Atlantic, don't really have any saltwater fisheries here in New Mexico in the center of the nation. But lionfish, I was reading about them and how they come in, they're very aggressive, and I guess they really attack the native fish. And so they're really establishing themselves. And I was like, oh my gosh, who would have thought that this, you know, it's kind of a cool looking, but it looks kind of aggressive to me. But issues of concern really for any of these invasive species of fish is, number one, they're out competing our native fish species. They cause an ecosystem imbalance because they're eating what our native fish would eat normally to survive. So now the native fish don't have any. It's part of that out competing them, because if there's not enough hamburgers around, you're going to go to another store, so another restaurant. And then the diseases that they could possibly be bringing in, because depending on where they're coming from. And so that's one of the things I know that with the national fisheries and with NOAA and all of those, that people are looking at, you know, when we have fishermen that are out in the coastal waters and they're going way far out, they catch a fish, they bring these fish in. Are they in fact dumping them back out there, or hopefully they're not putting them into our estuaries and our areas where our native fish are, because that could be a big issue. I didn't put up here, some of the mollusks, you know, that are a big problem in some of our freshwater streams, the tiger mussels and all of those kinds of things, but certainly they are definitely an issue as well. So I didn't want to leave the fish out, that we have concerns with invasive species of fish and what they're doing to our native fish populations. This one, Mitzi and I got to experience last May when we went to Florida. I'd always read about these guys, always heard that the Florida Everglades were being just overrun with these ball pythons. And it is a real deal. It was pretty amazing to me that, you know, these snakes, they're huge snakes. And whoops, I just minimized. Okay. These big snakes that people released, whether they were, you know, in Miami or whatnot, but people released these snakes and they got into a habitat where they're like, oh, there's plenty to eat here. And they, you know, they went after mice, rodents, rats, whatever it is they could in the Everglades. And now they're just taking over. They're just literally taking over. So there's bounties on them. The sad thing is they're moving north and they're moving into other areas. So we've got to be careful of this. That was a small snake. Okay, that was the ladies that we were working with, the snake in the bottom corner there. That was what they considered a small python. And I was like, I don't want to see a big one. I know when I lived in Bolivia, I saw some big snakes, and those were, you know, 12 and 14 foot snakes. They can be very aggressive. They definitely are something that I don't want to encounter when I'm out walking or, you know, hiking or just enjoying the outdoors. I don't want to run into any kind of snake. I've had my share of run-ins with rattlesnakes here in the desert Southwest. Don't really want to encounter any more. Ticks. And that's why I have this other picture up on top. That's not a white scale. Okay, that's not a scale that's lost its coloration, its pigment, keratin. That's a tick. Okay, we've seen pictures, and I have actually treated some snakes, not pythons, but some boa constrictors that were just infected with mites and with ticks. And so they have these little black spots all over them. And in some cases, they'll get those big swollen females and they go in between the scales. There again, they're looking for a blood meal. I always thought that ticks just wanted to feed on warm-blooded animals. Now they're just looking for blood. So any of your reptile species, they may be cold-blooded, but they can get ticks on them as well. Why is that such a big concern? Well, in Florida, they're so close to the Caribbean. There's a condition down there, well, a little organism, Coxiella, not Coxiella, but it's hard water disease. Yeah, Coxiella burnetii. And that is transmitted in the blood. So these ticks they can get it, then they come in, and if they get established on the mainland, heart water disease, very, very bad. It would be just devastating for our producers in Florida and for the wildlife, because it will kill, it will kill deer and whatever the tick is eating on. Just makes these animals extremely, extremely emaciated because it lyses the red blood cells. And so the animals will, in essence, bleed to death. So not a condition that we really want to have here in the United States. We don't want that to happen to any of our wildlife species. So ticks in pythons, very, very bad. Ticks on turtles, on anything else. So our reptile species are just as susceptible to some of these foreign animal diseases as our warm-bloodeds and domestic animals. This one was really super cool because I'd read about them in the past, but there have been these giant African land snails. These things are huge. They showed a picture. I didn't put it on here, but there was this picture of one. It almost looks like a baseball, or I mean a softball. I mean a big softball, big old grapefruit looking thing. This guy was holding it in his hand. That's why they're called giant African snails. Once again, recurrent introductions. They've come in. They've seen them mainly down in Florida, and that's where the current outbreak is at. USDA Wildlife Services is working diligently to try and get these things under control again. They get them back down, and then something will happen and they come back in. Whether they come in with hurricanes, whether they come in as, as a free rider on some ship with cargo, something like that. But these guys keep coming in. There are also some of them that were brought in intentionally. I don't know why you'd want this as a pet, but some people like having these things. And then they decide, oh, I don't want it anymore. Or Uncle so-and-so died and he had one of these snails in a terrarium because he thought it was cool. So they go turn it out. Not a good thing. And a lot of times that's what's happening, is that these invasive species, it wasn't really malicious that somebody turned them out, but they were just looking to see where they could put them out because they didn't want to deal with them. The big thing here is, number one, what they eat and the slime that they leave behind. And those of you that have dealt with snails, that's a lot of escargot. I don't think I want to eat that, no. But they do carry rat lungworm. And so they are carrying a disease that can then get into the lungworms, very, very bad. The rats will get the lungworm, they bring it into the house, they bring it into where people are eating, and it's this big vicious cycle. So lungworms, very bad, very, very bad. And these guys are one of the hosts for it, to just act as a vector, and they propagate it, and it just keeps going. But I just thought it was super cool that, why would you want a giant snail? But there again, we get into our tropical areas. So the poor Seminoles and Miccosukee folks down there, I'm sorry you guys have to deal with these things, because they're just gross, pythons and giant snails. Let's talk a little bit about the ticks. All right. I mentioned there are different types of ticks. So I put this picture up and you guys will have access to this. So you can always refer back to it. But the brown dog tick, Dermacentor variabilis, and the deer ticks, which is Oxoides species of ticks, and the Lone Star tick. And now we have this new Asian longhorn tick. It is, it's just coming across. Our eastern folks have gotten it. It's gotten pretty much into the eastern part of the Midwest. I'm afraid it's going to just keep on coming. But these new ticks, they're really aggressive. The females are the great big ones. And so, like I said, you can see the picture there. There's a male and a female tick right in the center, big engorged ones. Sometimes you won't notice that little scapula that is on the back of the female because she's so engorged. But on this one, you can kind of see that little black thing right by her head. And that's how you can identify them. I'll be honest with you, only in certain instances am I worried about, really looking that closely at a tick or putting it under a microscope. But certainly when you're out, when your folks are out, make sure they're wearing they're tucking in, they're blousing their pants. We're getting into summertime, everybody's going to be hiking, they're going to be wearing shorts and stuff. Tell them, gotta protect yourselves. DEET is really the only thing. And I know a lot of folks are like, I don't want to wear DEET, I want to wear chemicals. Then you really should be wearing pants and light colored clothing so that you can see these things and remove them as quickly as possible. Don't light a match and burn yourself to get the tick out, okay? Because all you're doing is drilling the head down farther in. Get a pair of tweezers or thumb forceps. I use hemostats. Get down right at the skin level and pull back so that you can pull that proboscis out and get that head out, because otherwise you're breaking it off. Or worse yet is you're squeezing the animal and then their saliva you're injecting down into yourself, and now you're giving yourself whatever they had in their mouth. Gross, just nastiness. But Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever here in the desert Southwest, and especially over in the mountains of Arizona, we've had tremendous problems with them. Babesiosis, and like I said, Babesia cabali, some of those are just ones that are not in the United States, but they're coming in, and they're diseases that would really do a lot of damage to our large ungulates, our small ungulates, the Florida key deer, all of our deer, our Roosevelt elk up in, in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, they've got problems with the hoof disease up there, elk hoof disease, but that's not zoonotic, okay? All of these are very much zoonotic diseases. Every single one that I've got listed there can affect humans. Your dogs, when your dogs are out with you, make sure that you've got proper flea and tick. So I mentioned for humans, really DEET is your best bet. Blousing your pants, wearing long sleeves, really making sure that at the end of the day you shower, you have a tick buddy that is going to help you, look for ticks. They're going to be small initially, but you want to make sure that you're looking for anything that doesn't, if it's, make sure it's not a mole, that it's, something you can remove. That's a tick. If you do get bit and you see a reaction on your skin, gets red, gets a little bit redder, starts making up some concentric circles, get to your doctor right away, because you need to get some doxycycline, minocycline. There's several antibiotics that you're going to need to take to prevent yourself from getting worse. And your dogs, same thing. We have NexGard, we've got all of the Bravecto, any of those kind of things that you can give to your dogs to keep them from getting them. Certainly ivermectin for your large horses, your goats, your sheep, anything like that. Are they labeled for wildlife? They are not. How do we get rid of these infections in wildlife? We don't, but we just try to do what we can with trying to maintain, there are powders and things, but we can't spread them all over the landscape. So there's a lot of different things. How do we get rid of ticks? I don't know. I don't know how to tell you. I mean, in my yard, I can tell you, but on a broad landscape, I don't know how to get rid of the ticks. They're there, and we have to just learn to live with them. So that got me into what can we do? Well, depending on the species, and I go back to these animals, we're trying to remove them. So the Bureau of Indian Affairs has a large program right now, like I mentioned before, for removing wild horses and burros off the landscape. You might have to use some live methods. You might have to use some lethal methods. A lot of it is going to depend on your population, the folks that you're on your reservation, what people are wanting to do. A lot of people don't want to round up feral dogs and cats. They want to leave them out there because they want Soul Dog Rescue or, whatever dog rescue company is around. They want them to come and gather them up and take them off to shelters. But I'll be honest with you, not all these dogs and cats that are out there are worthy of living in a household. They're just not. I mean, they're mixed breeds. They're often very, very aggressive. And when they've been out there on the landscape, sometimes it's nearly impossible. So sometimes You might have to use some lethal methods to remove some of these invasive species. I think it's maybe easier for some folks when we're talking pigs, because I think that's the biggest thing right now is they're hunting feral pigs. I know we trap quite a few, but they're not taken and relocated anywhere. It's a terminal removal. When we're talking the reptiles and things, I think the same thing is there. We're not worried about keeping those animals alive. It's terminal. They're getting rid of them. It's a lethal removal. So a lot of times when you're faced with these invasives and getting rid of them, you've got to kind of get the feel for, number one, the species, and number two, what your public, the people on your reservation, on your tribal lands, what are they trying to do? And then you can also look to some of your state counterparts and see what are some of your states helping with, and there are programs with federal dollars as well as state dollars. I know the state of Wyoming just gave $270,000 to one of our tribes up there to help them get rid of horses. So ultimately, we would love for eradication of invasive species because we want our native species to thrive. We want the native species to be able to go. I don't know if eradication is always going to be possible. Certainly with those big snails, they've eradicated them in times, in the past. And I hope that we can get more towards eradicating these invasive species. A lot of it is going to depend on the species. It's going to depend on what's available. So real quickly, because we're getting short to the hour, just want to review that invasive species can have multiple effects on land and animal species. Not only is it the disease they bring, but it's all their effect, what they do, what they eat, what they leave behind, that can be of public health concern to not only other animals, but to the two-leggeds. They certainly can bring in foreign animal diseases or non-native, we call them transboundary diseases, foreign animal diseases. They're all kind of the same, but things that are not currently here, that are not currently in your area. We used to know when I was first going to veterinary school back in the 80s, I'm an old lady, we didn't have heartworm. We did not have heartworm in our dogs and cats out here in the Western United States. We're dry. We're like, no, don't have. And then my sophomore year of vet school, I lost a little Sheltie out at mom and dad's place in Laguna. Didn't have access to water. We were like, how? He started with exercise intolerance. Lo and behold, heartworm in my own dog. So how did he get it? Well, people are moving, they're moving their animals around, and a lot of times they're moving these conditions around. So we have to be concerned with these animals can be carriers for new pathogens. And then, as much as I hate to say it, eradication may not always be something that we can get done. May not always be feasible, but we aim for that and we try to always get at least under control, and we're aiming for eradication. Hopefully someday we can get there. So I know that we're very short on the hour, but your best bet is to nip it in the bud. If you've got something, if you see something coming into your tribal lands, nip it in the bud. And that's why I left with this picture, because that little deer just wanted some water and that oryx was like not having it. Yeah. So nip it in the bud, get control of these before they get control of you. So any questions, I'll go back to the chat. I know we didn't have a huge population today. Tick paralysis, hound dog paralysis. Yep, there's just so many that are always out there that we have to be concerned about. So any other questions? Shaylin, Mitzi, do you guys see any that I missed, or anybody want to talk or voice while we have a couple of minutes? I think we're down to 3 minutes left. Sorry, it was a little bit short because we had technical difficulties getting on. But anybody?
I don't see any, but I'm gonna stop the recording really quick.
Okay.